I was 21 when my two friends and I decided to spend a weekend camping in a national forest about 3 hours from home. It was late October, cold enough that most people had already stopped camping for the season. That was exactly why we chose it. We wanted peace and quiet. We reached the campground just before sunset. There were only 4 occupied campsites, each far enough away that we couldn't hear anyone else. After pitching our tents, we gathered firewood, cooked hot dogs over the fire, and spent the next couple of hours talking. Around 9, one of my friends, Tyler, stood up and looked into the trees. "Did you hear that?" We stopped talking. Nothing, just the fire crackling. He shrugged and sat back down. 10 minutes later, we heard it too. Footsteps, slow, crunch. Crunch, crunch. Not a hiking trail. They were moving through the woods behind our campsite. We shined our flashlights toward the trees. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. Tyler called out, "Hello?" No answer. We figured another camper had wandered off the trail. It didn't seem like a big deal. Until we woke up the next morning. There was a folding chair sitting beside our fire pit. None of us had brought it. It looked old, faded, and muddy. Someone had carried it into our campsite while we were asleep. None of us had heard a thing. We looked around expecting another camper to come looking for it. Nobody did. That night, we made sure every flashlight had fresh batteries. Around midnight, I heard whispering. At first, I thought it was Tyler talking in his sleep. Then I realized the voices were outside, more than one. Too quiet to understand. I unzipped my tent just enough to look out. The campfire had burned down to glowing coals. No one was there. The whispering stopped. Then I heard one clear sentence. "He's awake." The voice came from somewhere behind my tent. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even zip the tent shut. A minute later, footsteps circled the campsite. Not running, walking, slowly, like someone was looking at every tent. I grabbed the bear spray we'd packed. The footsteps stopped beside Tyler's tent. I expected them to move on. Instead, I heard someone lightly press against the fabric. Tyler suddenly shouted, "Who's there?" The pressure disappeared instantly. The footsteps ran into the woods. By sunrise, we found footprints surrounding all 3 tents. Only one set. Whoever it was had walked around us for several minutes. There were no tracks leading toward another campsite, only deeper into the forest. We packed up and agreed to leave after breakfast. While loading the truck, I noticed something tucked beneath my windshield wiper. It was a folded piece of notebook paper. It had 6 words written in black marker. "Come back when you're alone." My girlfriend and I liked finding small campgrounds that weren't crowded. One summer, we found a place next to a lake that only had 6 campsites. The ranger warned us that there wasn't much cell service. That didn't bother us. We planned to stay just one night. The nearest occupied campsite was about 100 yards away. We saw an older couple there while setting up. They waved. We waved. That was the only time we saw them. After dark, we sat by the fire making coffee. Everything was quiet until someone whistled from the woods. It was short, just one whistle. I looked toward the trees. Nothing. A few minutes later, another whistle. Closer. My girlfriend asked if it was a bird. I wasn't sure. Then we heard a voice. "Emily." She looked at me. I didn't say anything. The voice had clearly said her name. It came from the darkness beyond the trees. I stood up. "Hello?" No answer. 5 minutes passed. We convinced ourselves we'd imagined it. Then the voice came again. This time it said my name, quietly, perfectly. Neither of us had told anyone we were camping there. Neither of us had spoken our names out loud since arriving. I grabbed my flashlight and walked 20 feet into the trees. There was nobody there. When I turned around, our campsite was empty. Not abandoned, empty. My girlfriend wasn't sitting by the fire anymore. The chair she'd been in was tipped over, and I heard her scream from somewhere behind me. I spun around so fast I almost dropped my flashlight. "Emily!" No answer. Then I heard another scream. This time it came from the direction of the lake. I ran toward it, tripping over roots and branches in the dark. My flashlight beam bounced everywhere. I couldn't see anyone. Then I heard her. "I'm over here." She stepped out from behind a tree about 30 yards away. She looked just as scared as I was. "What happened?" I asked. She pointed toward our campsite. "I thought you called my name from over here." "I never left the fire." Her face went pale. She told me she'd heard my voice from the woods saying, "Emily, come here." She thought I was joking. The moment she walked away from the campsite, she realized the voice wasn't moving. It stayed in the same place. Then she heard someone running behind her. When she turned around, no one was there. We hurried back together. The fire was still burning. Our cooler had been opened. Nothing was missing, but our food had been moved around like someone had been searching through it. My backpack was lying on its side. I knew I'd left it zipped. Inside, one pocket was open. The map of the campground was gone. That didn't make any sense. Why would someone steal a paper map? We decided to leave immediately. As I started packing, headlights appeared on the campground road. It was the park ranger. I flagged him down. After hearing what happened, he became unusually serious. He asked one question. "Did either of you follow a voice into the woods?" We both nodded. He sighed. "You aren't the first." He explained that over the past few years, several campers had reported hearing strangers call their names at night. No one had ever been caught. The ranger drove behind us until we reached the highway. About 15 minutes later, my girlfriend looked in the side mirror. A pair of headlights was following us, not the rangers. They stayed behind us for nearly 10 miles. Every time I changed lanes, they changed lanes too. Finally, I pulled into a brightly lit truck stop. The vehicle slowed, then kept driving. We never saw it again. To this day, I don't know who knew our names or how they knew them before we ever spoke. I went camping alone for the first time when I was 24. It wasn't deep in the wilderness. It was a small public campground surrounded by thick forest about an hour from the nearest town. There were only 3 occupied campsites that weekend. Mine was the furthest from the entrance. I spent the afternoon fishing, cooked dinner over a small fire, and climbed into my tent around 10. I fell asleep almost immediately. A sharp beam of light across my face woke me sometime after midnight. At first, I thought it was a ranger checking campsites. The light disappeared before I could zip the tent. A few seconds later, it came back. This time, it stayed on the side of my tent. Someone was standing outside. I held my breath. The flashlight slowly moved from one end of the tent to the other, like whoever was holding it was trying to see inside. Then, it clicked off. Silence. I waited. Nothing. I convinced myself it was over. Then I heard footsteps. They circled my tent once, stopped near the entrance, and a man's voice quietly asked, "Are you alone?" I didn't answer. A full minute passed. Then I heard him walk away. I waited another 10 minutes before looking outside. No flashlight, no person, only the dying campfire. I almost laughed at myself for being so nervous. Then I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A folding pocket knife was stuck upright in the ground, less than a foot from the entrance to my tent. I stared at the knife for several seconds before stepping out of the tent. It wasn't mine. It had a wooden handle with a cracked brass pin near the hinge. Someone had pushed it into the ground hard enough that it stood upright by itself. I looked around the campsite with my flashlight. Nothing. The trees were completely still. I picked up the knife using a towel and tossed it into the back of my truck. There was no chance I was leaving fingerprints on something that belonged to a stranger. I didn't even try to go back to sleep. I stayed in a folding chair beside the fire until sunrise. Around 5 in the morning, I heard an engine. A pickup truck rolled slowly past my campsite. It didn't stop. The driver never looked at me. It continued toward the end of the campground road. There was only one problem. The road ended less than a quarter mile ahead. There was nowhere else to go. I waited. 5 minutes? 10. The truck never came back. Curious, I drove to the end of the road after sunrise. There was a locked service gate. Beyond it, nothing but hiking trails. No parking area, no turnaround. The truck should have passed me on its way back. It never did. I reported the strange encounter to the campground office before leaving. The employee asked me to describe the knife. When I did, his expression changed. He opened a drawer beneath the counter and pulled out a clear evidence bag. Inside was another knife. Same wooden handle, same cracked brass pin. He said, "We found this at another campsite last month." The camper who reported it said someone walked around his tent asking if he was alone. The stories were nearly identical. The park had increased nighttime patrols, but nobody had ever been caught. I stopped camping alone after that. Months later, while scrolling through a local news page, I recognized the truck from that morning. It had been abandoned in the woods a few miles from the campground. No driver was ever found. The police never said whether it was connected, but I never forgot the question I heard outside my tent. Are you alone? Now, whenever anyone asks me to go camping by myself, my answer is always the same. No, not anymore.